Make your next move with American Express Business Platinum. Earn 5 times membership rewards points on flights and prepaid hotels booked on AmexTravel.com. And with a welcome offer of 150,000 points after you spend $20,000 on purchases on the card within your first 3 months of membership, your business can soar to new heights. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-platinum. Amex Business Platinum. Built for business by American Express.
Good night, itchy eyes. Good night, sudden sneeze. Good night to your symptoms of allergies. Xyzal is the allergy medicine you take before bed. It provides powerful relief while you rest your head. Not just all night, but all the next day. Xyzal keeps working, keeping allergies at bay. And without those annoying symptoms disturbing your rest, you can wake up the next morning feeling your absolute best. Remember, be wise all, take Xyzal. At night.
After just 7 days, 96% of Shiseido Benefiance Wrinkle Smoothing Eye Cream users saw reduced wrinkles and diminished dark circles. Shop now at Sephora and discover how change can happen in the blink of an eye. Consumer tested by 110 women.
Welcome to the New Books Network.
I'm Chris Holmes, and this is Burned by Books. Here you'll find interviews with writers you already love, like Jennifer Egan and Rebecca Mackay, mixed in with up-and-coming voices like Alexandra Kleeman and Rumaan Alam. You'll find us wherever you listen to podcasts, but check out previous episodes at burnedbybooks.com and on Instagram and Twitter at burnedbybooks. Let's start the show. Hi, this is Chris. I'm checking in with you just to let you know that there's something special with this week's episode. Farrar, Straus and Giroux has given us a free snippet of the audiobook of Playworld, and I hope that you'll stay on after the interview with Adam Ross and listen to a little bit of this gorgeous rendering of the book. So with that, let's get started. For Griffin Hurt, trying to juggle the life of a teenager at an elite prep school, the daily work of being a successful child actor, and the grueling punishments of wrestling at weight is getting to be a bit much. And this ignores his ongoing relationship with a woman 20 years his senior. Such are the predicaments that Adam Ross sets out for his protagonist in this gorgeous new novel, Playworld. Griffin's existence seems as real as his role on the TV show Nuclear Family, with scene after scene of unexpected turns that surprise him as much as anyone else. There is Amanda, the gorgeous and appropriately aged focus of his adoration, and then there is Naomi, friend of his parents and the woman who initiates him into a form of adult intimacy, both physical and in conversations that spool forth like tales from Scheherazade. Playworld feels like a novel of another time. The world of 1980s New York sprawls out before us in textured detail, and characters are given time and nuance to develop and surprise as their arcs turn and change. There's John Irving in here, Thomas Wolfe, Philip Roth, and even some Russians in the DNA of Playworld. All of these things come together in a novel that is full of pleasures and entirely immersive. Playworld and Griffin Hurt were both difficult to set aside. Adam Ross is the author of Mr. Peanut, which was selected as one of the best books of the year by the New York Times, the New Yorker, and The Economist. He has been a fellow in fiction at the American Academy in Berlin and a Hodder Fellow for Fiction at Princeton University. He is the editor of the Sewanee Review. Born and raised in New York City, he now lives in Nashville, Tennessee with his 2 daughters. Welcome to the show, Adam Ross.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
It's a real thrill to get to talk to you. In particular, I was so excited when I saw this novel because Mr. Peanut was such a big book for me the year it came out. I just remember, it was all I could think about for a time, and I'm very happy to say that Playworld has matched it in my head. And part of that is about how much I love Griffin, because he's such an unlikely mix of things. He's a gifted young actor who is easily tongue-tied around girls, a wrestler who is gentle and empathetic, a poor student who is quick-witted and deeply intelligent, How did Griffin emerge from your imagination? Was he fully formed with a voice? And how important are his contradictions to the character you wanted to create?
Oh, Griffin was not fully formed as a voice. I really initially struggled, Chris, with getting a handle on Griffin's voice. Partly that is the challenge always, I think, of writing in first person, right?
Mm, mm.
I mean, if you're going to write in first person and that character is going to, be accompanying the reader over the course of what, it quickly became clear to me was a long novel. They have to have an element of charm, right? They have to, but they also have to have the capacity to enchant. And I think just as importantly, and on a really practical level, a practical narrative level, they have to have the ability to guide you through experiences to do, it's almost like parenting well. Like they have to do this, that narrator has to be able to let the reader go forth into this world. You have to like sort of allow the reader to go forth into this world unaccompanied. And then the reader has to be accompanied, as it were, by the narrator. And so the reason that was a particular challenge in Playworld as I was wrestling with the voice was I really wanted it to have two very important capacities or modes, and they were temporal. One was the Griffin of what my editors and I dubbed the Griffin of what we called knowingness, or what we also like to call Griffin future. And Griffin future is the component of the voice which is not exactly recollecting in tranquility. And I think I listen to your podcast all the time, and we can really delve into this because I know how technical you get in ways that I just admire. But resembles a narrator that recollects in tranquility and gives the reader certain forms of traction on a chapter to chapter, scene to scene, moment to moment basis. But then there's Griffin present, and Griffin present has to be the character with whom you empathize, sympathize, are charmed by, root for. But most importantly, in terms of the project of Playworld, he is the character who gets brought right up to the aquarium's glass of these experiences. And he gets brought so close to the experiences that, and I mean, this based on highfalutin, but my editors and I talked about it like this. He gets brought up right up to experiences that are for him, given his age as a 14-year-old at the beginning of the novel and a 15-year-old by its end, are sublime. Which is to say that in the most classic sense of the word, they are ineffable. He does not have language for them.
Yeah, and they can be both terrifying and blissful, sublime, I think.
Exactly. And I was really deeply influenced by a writer I was reading in the very early 90s who just, blew my doors off. And that was Harold Brodkey. And
I don't know him.
Oh gosh, you're in for a treat. Harold Brodkey's stories in an almost classical mode are truly incredible. He has a quote, I'm going to paraphrase it, but he says something to the effect of like, I reject the idea of recollection and tranquility. And I, kind of reject where it has brought us in Western civilization. He's like, I feel like we need, when we tell stories, we need to be on our knees before the event. And that was really critical with Griffin, because what I was really trying to get at was something that I have come to find generationally is a really universal experience. And that universal experience is that we were parented at a time when we were constantly bumping up against the world, and our parents weren't accompanying us the way parents today are accompanying us. And so Griffin was constantly having these encounters, which I think.
And are you putting this, sorry to interrupt, are you saying this is a Gen X, like a firmly Gen X name?
Yeah, for lack of better nomenclature, right? So I mean, like, it was just a way when I was thinking about the stories I wanted to tell, what the novel contained. I was like, the only way this really works, and the only way this doesn't collapse into, again, this was a term I didn't have at my fingertips at the time, but the way this doesn't collapse into something like trauma porn or an overdetermined narrative, was to have that oscillation between those two voices. So I really struggled with it, but once I found it, and once I kind of came to understand its operations, then I was able to really arrive at what is, a fictional narrator. This is a really long answer, but what I'll say is that, so many people point out the ways in which Griffin has what look like on the outside sort of autobiographical components are of my life. And I'm more than happy to talk about those things. But as a young man, I was much wiser than Griffin, and much more of a wise ass. I was much more disruptive. There were a lot of ways that I was meaner and cunning than he is. And so it really was important to make him more vulnerable to some of these influences, and not have anything that even resembled what we would call precocity.
Yeah, no, he just sort of walks into things with, he has a knowingness in his voice, and then he'll sort of fall flat on his face into something that, at that time probably would have seen coming, and that the adult reflective narrator would certainly see coming. But the important thing, as you say, is that you do enough oscillation back into present Griffin that we fall with him.
Yes.
And we feel that sense of, our childhood naivete takes us to these places where we end up having experiences that, I think you said it perfectly, that we don't have language for.
Exactly.
And that's becomes this sublime thing in our reading, as well as in Griffin's life. And I really like what you said about, wanting to steer away from kind of trauma porn, because there are a lot of traumatic things that happen in the novel, but they don't feel like they have to collapse everything into them like a star collapsing in on itself.
Absolutely.
They can be traumatic, but they also, they don't have to be the sole thing that Griffin understands his life as. How is it? I think, and the book that always comes to mind for me is A Little Life, as being, the collapsing of everything.
Never read. I have never read it.
I think you're okay not reading it, but it sort of collapses everything into trauma. How did you sort of skirt around that, and still wanting, the reader to sense like this is a bad thing to happen to a 14-year-old, a child, and at the same time have it not have to eclipse everything?
Well, because you're really setting out, depending on the scale of your narrative, and depending of the time sequence of your narrative. Once you commit to a frame, you're committing to your own sense of truth. And my own sense of truth about quote unquote traumatic things, and trauma as a descriptor being something that, again, is, as far as I'm concerned, a new form of existential language, right? Or psychological language. Like, we didn't speak in the language of boundaries and trauma when I was a kid. And so many of the things that are happening to Griffin happen at such a pace, and are so, in their own ways, I was going to say torrential, but frankly, Chris, they're just atmospheric, right? I mean, they're environmental.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and the thing is that it's not like, I mean, Lord knows, given everything that's in the air these days, or that's in the cultural dialogue these days. I mean, like, I am in no way, shape, or form saying that, like, it was worse then, or it's better now, or vice versa. What I'm trying to say is just that, my truth was that there was a way in which, when I was trying to write a novel that tapped into, you know, tonally and experientially the aspects of my childhood. Because this is like, I don't know, this is like my Adventures of Augie Mark. You know what I mean? In the sense that that's what the target was just like the feeling of that time in life is that things were constantly happening, and water, however toxic, was rolling off this duck's back. And now, I mean, at the same time, like, sticking with that metaphor, I mean, like, there were oil spills and oil slicks, and some of that tar didn't come off. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
but I mean, but I think that going back to what we were saying about the oscillation, you know, and to get even really technical, the way in which the dramatic irony operates in the novel, the reader is the one who actually has the highest degree of knowingness. The reader is the
Well,
one
yeah,
who is sitting there going like, ooh, like,
yeah. Wait a
that is
second.
that is going to leave a mark. And so for the narrative to operate, I love your metaphor of the black hole, because the reader is the one who gets to put the book down at certain moments that are, I think, or I like to think, intensely moving, and and ponder it, and step out of narrative time. And that, to me, is mimetic of what we do in life, right? Where things happen to us, and we spend our lives in that hermeneutic, like, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, oh, that's what was going on.
Yep.
Are your business expenses playing hide and seek? With Uber for Business, the small spends that slip through the cracks, like rides and meals, go right where you need them. Because it integrates with leading expense platforms, you can say goodbye to surprise costs, missing dollars, or chasing receipts. Everything's track downable. Uber for Business. Make small steps that make a big impact. Learn more at uber.com/small steps.
Brace the rudders! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Get started today at linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply.
And trying to kind of unwind ourselves out of the narrative. I mean, your term atmospheric is really useful here, because as these things are happening to Griffin, they get written into just the kind of structuring of his life. So you have to go to wrestling practice, and these things happen there. And also, when you're walking down the street, when you see Naomi's car, like, that's where you stop in. And there, it becomes a structure of living, even though, as you say, the reader's like, oh, hold on a second, I have some thoughts about those things. And it's, our thoughts really come strongly around the way in which Griffin is abused by adults in various ways, some very explicit, some less so, some very physical and traumatic, and some emotional, psychological. Naomi is in a way the most complicated of those. She's someone who, through power and age differential, initiates a relationship that's very inappropriate. And yet she's someone who can be a sounding board about the world with Griffin in a way that he can't find at home, and he can't find with other people. And so I wonder if you could talk us through a little bit about the complications of Naomi's place in Playworld, and her pivotal, sometimes toxic, sometimes just crucial part in Griffin's development.
Yeah, I mean, I will just say that on a kind of macro level, there was a real commitment in rendering all of these characters to make sure that all of these characters not in a sort of checkbox way had, redeeming qualities, but that all of these characters had a kind of humanity, right? And so digressing just a little bit before I answer your question about Naomi, there was a way in which, whether it was Dr. West or Elliot or Al Moretti or even, Allison in makeup at the Nuclear Family, or Andy Ackerman, the guy who plays his dad, that any and all of these people, and frankly, in some ways, even Coach Keppelman, that all of these people had things to offer him that that were gifts. You know what I mean? That were like that were gifts, and were never rejected outright, because Griffin's mode of operation in the world is to watch and listen very, very, very closely. But and that's his survival tactic, along with disappearing. But anyway, with Naomi, she is both this fortunate, and she is a person that Griffin is on, very, on a very ambiguous level. Like, he's very fortunate to encounter, because because she is attentive to him and mirrors back to him certain experiences in ways that Elliot, his therapist, at least in the early stages of the book, is incapable of doing, that certainly his parents are, generally speaking, incapable of doing. And so she begins to tease him out of his own kinds of defense strategies of dealing with these people, because he does have this, some original forms of trauma. It doesn't really spoil anything to say that, there's a house fire that is so central to his early development.
Yeah.
And, she's the first person, when he tells her that story, to be like, oh my God, like, well, why was that handled in that way? And he's never thought of that. So she gifts him with that. She gifts him with what we would associate with a very authentic kind of adult and maternal attention.
Yeah.
However, unwittingly, and I think this is one of those unwitting aspects that play out with people who may not have suffered predation themselves, but are deeply, deeply lonely, that she, both because of certain kinds of ways in which she misunderstands the experiences he's had, and because she is in a terribly lonely marriage herself, does not have the defenses herself of a therapist. And so, because she sees aspects of him in his young adulthood that are nascent and masculine and beautiful, that she starts to cross lines. And I think you can see in the early stages of it was very important to me in the early stages of the novel, that you see that she's not unwitting in terms of her sense of boundary. Like, she knows in the early stages of the book, maybe where some of the lines are, and maybe she's hoping Griffin will be the one to cross those lines, and she abnegates some of that she abnegates, I think, some of those responsibilities. Like, she almost mistakes him for being more adult than he is. But the interesting nether that they're in, and this is figured forth, by the way, with where they meet. They meet on this, what Griffin calls the dead street. They meet on this street that has, like, it's a street that seems to almost have no purpose, or no, it's not a transverse in New York. And so this place for them is a weird kind of purgatory, where they can both creep close to things that are wild, and things that are dangerous, and things that are inappropriate.
Yeah. So I'm a huge John Irving lover. He was somebody that I kind of whet my early love of novels on, and even before I came upon the direct reference to his work in the book, I felt his presence there. he is a lover of quirks and eccentricities in his characters, and he's very interested in taboo intimacy in all of his novels. And of course, he's obsessed with wrestling and was a wrestler and a coach. I wonder what Irving's influence is on the novel and on your writing life.
This may come as a surprise. The only John Irving books that I have read are The Cider House Rules, which I read. I know I read in high school. We could do the we I'm pretty sure I read in high school. And what I recall about The Cider House Rules was the sweep of it. And what a term that I like to use with my staff at the Sewanee Review was a kind of just remarkable narrative fluency, right? There's a way in which there's a way in which I think someone like Roth or Bellow have a similar capacity to move into any space it seems they wish, and just can just, you're just riding this, you're whitewater rafting on their narrative it's so powerful, and they just seem to have this like inexhaustible issuance for, right?
Yeah, epic is irrelevant.
Topic is, I love that. Topic is completely irrelevant. And then the other book of his that I only read part of was A Widow for 1 year. And I only read the beginning of A Widow for 1 year. And I was like, oh my God, this is like the beginning of Chang Ray Lee's The Surrendered. Like it is such tour de force writing.
That one with the car accident at the beginning, right?
That's the one where the kid comes to be the squash partner of the children's writer and the children's book writer, and his wife is in a state of nearly catatonic grief because they've lost the son.
Oh, that's right.
And and she ends up having an affair with the son.
Mm-hmm.
And then, in my opinion, that novel, well, not just my opinion in terms of my ability to read it, the novel, once it exited that moment, that chapter, that narrative movement, the novel just fell off a cliff, and like I couldn't press forward with it. So I didn't read Garp, but but I did know that in Garp he touches on wrestling, and of course as a subject, wrestling is so central for Irving. And so there's a way in which the illusion when Griffin goes to the library to get literally more wrestling moves, he gets a manual on wrestling moves. That is illusion as tip of the hat. Like, Mr. Irving, I know that I am going into your reputed territory, and punch my ticket, please. But but I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it my way. And yeah, I mean, because wrestling is so central to the book, and I personally, as somebody who was a very distinguished wrestler in high school, I mean, like, I was definitely busting my knuckles before those scenes and being like, okay, reader, like, I'm gonna make you feel it.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a powerful part of Griffin's life. I knew from just having sort of, read around that it was a powerful part of your life. And I see it in the book as these rituals and structures that organize a young man's early relationship to his body in a time in which you're so, like, you feel totally distinct from your body. I can remember being that age and kind of like walking into door frames and like just not understanding my body. And so even though there's this like powerful, painful, abusive relationship with the coach, he's getting this sense from wrestling that he could understand his body differently. So tell us about your own experience as a wrestler, but also talk about that way of having a different kind of structured relationship to the body.
Well, first of all, in all of the interviewing I've done, you're the first person to bring that up, and I'm so appreciative of it, because the idea of the structure, the relationship to your body, because I just think that one of the things that isn't addressed enough and is not enough of a part of our current culture's conversation about manhood and young manhood is how terrifying our own bodies are for us, and how as young men we don't enter the intimate and sexual milieu as, baby gray white shark.
Yeah.
We enter,
I'm sure.
we enter it in quite the opposite way. It is a thing that is strange to us. I've said in other conversations, women are creatures of feeling, and operate in atmospheres of feeling, but men are so, at that age, they're so sensitive. And one of the things that I think makes for a terribly toxic brew for young men is that not many other men are talking them through these kinds of confusing feelings. So yes, your observation is absolutely right. But you know what? I do kind of want to take this in a little bit of a different direction, because for me, Chris, the encounters that Griffin has in wrestling, it's not that your observation isn't absolutely spot on. It is. But what I will tell you from an author intention standpoint was that in the chapter in particular, The Agony of Defeat, what Griffin is first encountering when he goes to this tournament and he's seeing, the gods and titans of this world of wrestling, is he's encountering the power of style. Like he is encountering what a fully formed style looks like, and how fully formed style, the different styles of different wrestlers, how that power gives them the capacity to express, to have tremendous leverage, and to express their own powers against other bodies. And for Griffin, this is like extraordinarily seductive and desired, because, without spoiling anything, he lost his first wrestling match with his father, after their house fire. There's, as you recall, there's a wrestling match, essentially, what is equivalent to a wrestling match with his father when he's hiding with his father. And that is, to me, when Griffin doesn't want his father to literally carry him off somewhere.
Yeah.
Griffin's always fighting that fight. But then it's also built in there to express the way, if to apply this to your observation or to your structure or trope. I mean, like, it then becomes a way of literally being embodied in a way where, I don't know, it must, to me, when you get really good at wrestling, and I'm someone now, I've been doing jujitsu now for almost 9 years. Like, when you get really good at jujitsu, really good, I'm scare quoting that, but meaning like you move into a space where you're just reacting. And it's like dance at the highest level. And again, and what is that? Another word for that? It's just mastery. And that is something, I think, in a Bildungsroman, that at least I wanted the reader to see Griffin is just beginning to chase. Now, of course, if we, again, protecting the listener from spoilers, I mean, there is the element of weight loss.
Yeah.
And in that case, right? I mean, weight loss, if you pun that out, Griffin has got to stop waiting for things to happen. But Griffin, in his life, he's got to take agency. But Griffin also is forced, by dint of deprivation and dehydration, to disengage with his body. And this has like nearly catastrophic consequences.
I mean, is the chapter, is it The Agony of Defeat that contains
his hostages, where he does the crazy weight loss?
Yeah, that's one of the most intense things I've read recently. And I found myself just ill from the what he has to go through, what he has to put his body through to try and get down to this impossible weight, a loss of like 13 pounds or something.
It's like 30 pounds, which I hate to say. I mean, like, I'll just confess to the listeners, like, I did have this terribly abusive coach in high school at a time when there weren't checks on uh, this kind of practice of weight loss in wrestling. And yeah, I once lost 12 pounds in like
Oh my
2
God.
days. And it's very dangerous, especially for a kid. Cause I mean, you're not a full grown man carrying around maybe some extra body weight.
Yeah, no.
You're a kid. And so you're losing like 10, 12, 13% of your body weight, which is primarily water weight. And yeah, it is it is a nightmare. And that's what, but look, I mean, what is Playworld also about? I mean, Playworld is, again, I love the way you phrased it. I mean, like, you could argue that the entire arc of Playworld is about Griffin becoming more and more embodied in certain ways and discovering ways in which he's disembodied or detached. And that sets up again all sorts of, it casts so many shadows beyond the frame of the novel about what kind of adult he's going to turn out to be.
My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
It's summer. Time to enjoy long days, lazy nights, and zero cooking. Because Uber Eats has deals all summer long. So when hunger strikes, don't sweat it. Delicious deals are just a tap away on Uber Eats. Enjoy all your favorite food delivered straight to you. Get Burger King, Subway, Popeyes, and hundreds more local favorites and savor every last bite. Now that sounds like a good summer. Order now on Uber Eats. Terms apply. Product availability varies by region. See app for details.
Have you encountered the work of Raul Palma?
No.
He's my colleague. He had a big novel last year, The Haunting of Hialeah Gardens. But he also has an incredible collection of short stories, and one of them is loosely based on his own experience as a major high school wrestler in Florida, where his abusive coach decides to basically, after a humiliating loss, drive the team out into the, into essentially the jungle and leave them there and have them see if they can find their way back. And I guess this actually happened to him. But it's one of my favorite stories of recent times, and I feel like it would speak to you in different ways than it did to me.
I just wrote it down. I mean, when I think about, there's so much there were so many other ways I could have come at some of the kinds of manipulation, leverage, and frankly sadism that you run into when you have a bad coach. And so, yes, they are legion and they are infinite, and that no one owns that subject completely is capital T truth.
Yeah, and it does seem to be this thing that in the real world and in the worlds of fiction, there's such a fine line between sadism and great coaching. And because Griffin is 14 and 15, he can't understand that line has been crossed and not just blurred, but just trammeled upon.
Yeah, but to flip the script, Chris, because again, this is why in a Bildungsroman, or what is also a Bildungsroman that kind of subtly contains a Künstlerroman, right? I mean, like, if some young person came up to me, if someone at 14 could be like, Mr. Ross, I really want to be I really want to be a novelist. I'd be like, well, son, like, you need to start wrestling because like, get ready to be in positions that are horrifically uncomfortable. Get ready to have, pardon my French, but have your ass kicked like 3 or 4 times a day. And then like your favorite video game avatar, reconstitute and start again. because just generally speaking, the experience of the wrestler, qua wrestler, is not that much different from the experience of the writer as novelist, because you kind of like have this kind of very sort of like imaginary longitudinal view of like where you're going, and you get whooped every day on the way to that. And then, sentence by sentence, paragraph by successful sentence by successful sentence, paragraph by paragraph, chapter by chapter, you build on those moments where you pull something off.
I was going to make a analogy between acting and writing, but now we have a three-way, but I wanted to, because acting is the kind of parallel to wrestling in the novel, I wanted to
absolutely
get into it and think about how, like, even when it's not at the forefront of his thinking, which is most of the time, his father is this sort of orbiting satellite of, wanting to live vicariously through his son and wishing for something bigger for himself on the stage, even as Griffin's life contains like Diane Lane and Shelley Duvall and these amazing sort of celebs.
Don't forget Jill Clayburgh.
Jill Clayburgh, who walk through his life and walk across the stages that he's on. But yeah, that paralleling with wrestling also, I think, creates this wonderful paralleling with writing fiction, an attempt to embody a character that is not yourself. You talked about wrestling as like a feat of style, and I think that is shared with acting and writing. And I want you to talk a little bit about why you wanted Griffin to be a child actor and to have this be a kind of paralleling of wrestling and perhaps of the art of fiction.
Well, so diving right into some of the things that happened in Playworld, one of the surprises for Griffin in the novel, as a kid who, when we first meet him, is just quote unquote playing himself. In other words, when, he is the classic, Ron Howard described them as performing animals, child actors. He is the classic child actor in the sense that he doesn't have technique. What he has is the ability to just sort of be himself in front of the camera. The camera starts rolling and he can just, just again, along the lines of the themes you mentioned earlier, he can inhabit his body and be perfectly comfortable sounding like a 14-year-old kid in front of the camera. But he doesn't have to invent character. And what ends up happening is that when in the second part, in part two of the novel, he finds himself with what amounts to a great director.
Yeah.
A great director who is, again, toggling between giving him direction with regard to everything from line readings and, scene pressure, right, to performance on the micro level, to also, giving him the 30,000-foot view, like in his direction, and basically being like, okay, Griffin, like if you're going to inhabit this scene properly, effectively, then you need to know what's going on in the broader narrative of this film. Like you need to do your homework.
Yeah.
Well,
so many times he hasn't read the script, or at least hasn't finished it, and is sort of like, just as you say, entering it from the wild.
Exactly, Chris. And then like, of course, like, duh, like what is that a metaphor for? Right. I mean, like, so basically what he finds himself in a situation with as an actor is where he's got to develop more refined situational awareness, more of a sense of narrative, more of a sense of character. And so guess what? Like that too is like what you do when you're writing a novel. Like you start to rely on, character logic, story arc. You have a clearer sense of your command of various kinds of irony, what the you're not just, again, I love that phrase, like, coming in from or being in the wild, like, your early stages of feeling around a novel are being in the wild, but you're in conversation with the story you're writing and you become more and more aware of its operations. And so Griffin as an actor is very lucky to then have, again, going back to this idea of bumping up against the world. Griffin as an actor bumps into an artist, a real artist. And the real artist is like, no, kid. Like, if you're going to do this, here's some guidelines about what my expectations are. So in other words, this great director is treating him like an adult, and similarly, what I would say is, I guess I'm very much from the Nabokov school, where, Nabokov would sort of scoff at the idea of, inspiration and the characters just speaking through him. Nabokov would always love to talk about, in this sort of like of mock tyrannical tone, how like he was in charge here, like he was directing the shadow play. And so, as you get deeper and deeper into your novel, it's not that you're not unconscious of certain connections that, God bless great readers and great critics, they make for you. And it's a wonderful part of the process, and great editors. But, again, it's an enormous life lesson. Griffin gets an experience in true professionalism, and he may not be aware of it fully, again, in the frame of Playworld, but I think that given some of the knowingness of Griffin future, it is strongly indicated that down the road, these lessons aren't lost on him.
So Griffin may be the first person ever to receive a part in a school play as a punishment, but he does indeed find himself playing a role in As You Like It as a detention of sorts for blowing off a different role.
Yes.
And this play has, Shakespeare's famous "All the World's a Stage" line, which you dramatize,
and a wrestler,
and a wrestler, and it's certainly that kind of "all the world's a stage" reflects back on the title and the way that we're asked to think about the artificial difference between the play world and the real world. But As You Like It is a story of transformation, of becoming someone else in order to find your true self, the essence that you find in the wayward forest. And in that way, it seems such a perfect match for Griffin's wandering youth. So tell us about the play and how this play that he wants nothing to do with becomes, so central.
Well, Chris, I'm just going to say you're like Dr. West in Playworld. Like you come up, it's like, ladies and gentlemen, Chris Holmes just said it best. I can't say it better, but
oh, nice.
No, I mean, so this, first of all, again, like from the 30,000 foot view, I'm just going to lay it out there. People can line up and try to cancel me all they want, but it hurts my heart that Shakespeare as an author has become this like controversial person to be read, because, man, I mean, like, I grew up, I mean, one of the things I was just trying to do is like, my education growing up was shot through with Shakespeare. And it was like, it was just like, it was part and parcel of becoming a high school kid. It was actually part and parcel. We were reading Shakespeare when I was growing up in 7th and 8th grade, reading like Julius Caesar, and you'd encounter like, what's an anachronism? It's like, oh, there's a clock in Julius Caesar. That's what an anachronism is. You never forget these things, right? But you also never forget like the power of Antony's great speech. Like you're like, oh wow, it's like super eye-opening. But then in terms of As You Like It, yes, Griffin is wandering through a magical forest. He loves to talk about Central Park as like the Forest of Arden in the middle of Manhattan. And then also, there is an absolutely magical element, which is always the case in any Shakespeare play. When they go into the pastoral, the world is going to be destabilized, whether it's social hierarchies, with class hierarchies, gender, whether it's people falling in love with people that they shouldn't, that are, again, so
all taboos are permissible in the woods.
All taboos are permissible in the woods. And then, generally speaking, if we're in comedies, there's a marriage at the end and everything works out. But, in Playworld, because I'm just going to seize on the important word used, which was transformation.
Mm-hmm.
Playworld is for me, a novel of Griffin becoming a kind of monster.
Mm-hmm.
And by that, remember this, by the way, again, this has very Shakespearean roots. I mean, this was my education. Like the word monster in Shakespeare is a very like polyvalent term. Caliban.
Yeah.
Caliban is a monster, and there are ways in which Ariel is a kind of monster. Okay? So like the polarities at the end of Shakespeare's career of monster are super id and super eros and super generative, super destructive, the whole 9 yards. And Griffin, over the course of Playworld, is transformed into, someone who inhabits his body more comfortably, is deformed, I think, in ways, or certainly will be kind of deformed by certain of the things that he has experienced.
Yeah.
He becomes superpowered in certain ways, which again aren't, and when I say superpowered, I mean the ways in which the more acutely angular aspects of our own characters make us superpowered in certain ways, and they're often very closely related to our worst qualities. And so, yeah, I mean, like, and we didn't even touch on like, the Dungeons and Dragons theme in the book. I mean, the idea that, New York, the city, is a city in this book, which is in transformation.
Yeah. And the Upper West Side that you describe is so different and
oh my gosh,
in kind of active, just even in that 1 year of Griffin's life, in active transformation.
Active transformation. I mean, think about, it's so wild to think about, but gosh, I remember, I vividly remember the assassination of Lenin, and that's very much a touchstone. That's very much like a touchstone event in the book. It is a murder that on a certain level, if you can say such things about an act of insanity, is inspired by literature because Mark David Chapman basically thought he was Holden Caulfield. So there's a mistaken role and mistaken identity for you. And what did it do? Well, it literally changed the way in which the castles of the rich got patrolled and secured. You know what I mean? Like, like after that, there was a guard box outside of the Dakota. It was memorialized. I mean, like, it's just, I'll tell you, it's a very wild thing having grown up in Manhattan, lived there throughout my childhood, come back after going to college at Vassar. So I was only like a short train ride from New York, leaving in 1991. And then suddenly the New York of my childhood became a city of memory. And for the rest of my life, the city of memory kind of lay palimpsestically over the city that was, constantly in transformation and became unrecognizable to me. And so transformation and instability is the life of, I like to say movement is our resting state. So, we are as cells in a state of constant movement, but so are cities. Cities are so dynamic and unstable. And that's part of what I think I was trying to get at. I mean, that's the Forest of Arden-ish aspect of Playworld.
Hey, this is Bill Simmons from the Bill Simmons Podcast, here to help you make the most of your summer with Michelob Ultra, a superior light beer worth playing for. Play for it with the guys when you're competing to see who can sink more birdies on the golf course, because winning tastes even better with Ultra on the line. Play for Ultra. Fill your fridge with Michelob Ultra this summer. Enjoy responsibly. Copyright 2025 Anheuser-Busch Michelob Ultra Light Beer, St. Louis, Missouri.
Not all meals are created equal. For instance, breakfast has the spicy egg McMuffin for a limited time, and lunch doesn't. McDonald's breakfast comes first. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Yeah, and I get tired of the the city is like a character in the book, but
yes, I do too.
But what I love is that you allow New York to be a historical space, a very different New York from what we know now, and a space of the imagination then for Griffin.
Yes.
And it isn't just one or the other. It's both at the same time, which I think gives it a richness. And also, I think, big cities are like that. They mean very specific things to specific people who move in certain routes and ways within those cities. And so they have a imaginative force that is different from person to person. And I think you get
to say, yeah, Chris, I mean, I have to say, like, again, as a native New Yorker, I often, and Griffin talks about this in the book, about the parts of the city he would subsequently discover later in life, right? That at a different age, he weaponized and considered like forbidden zones, right? I mean, like, what is so crazy to me about cities, like a city like New York, is their infinite quality. Like in other words, like if you took the, what is it 8 million or 13 million? If you took the 13 million or 8 million, I don't know the number, New Yorkers, and then like lifted in 3 dimensions each individual's map of Manhattan, because no one would have a map of the complete map of Manhattan. And then you overlaid those on everyone's, oh my gosh, like, the different ways in which people live in cities. And then, that's when, to me, in crazy ways, you're into a magical world. And like my quick, a quick story about this would be, for instance, as a native New Yorker, I remember when I moved back to Manhattan, when I graduated and lived there for 2 years, and would either go out with friends or go out on dates with people who weren't from the city, and they would introduce me to a whole new Manhattan. And it was just like, oh my gosh, like, how did I live in this city for this long? I didn't know about this place.
That's so amazing. Before I let you go, I'd love to know a little bit about some things you've been loving recently, and maybe some things you'd like to recommend for the listeners.
Well, I'll give you 3, but I'm going to give you 3 with a bonus. I mean, of course, putting on my Swanee Review editor hat. I've been the editor of the Swanee Review since 2016. You can subscribe to the Swanee Review at www.swaneereview.com. The Swanee Review on a quarterly basis, offers up, I think, one of the great mixtapes in the small presses right now. So, if you want to get in on the ground floor of certain talents in this great polyphonic scene that is American Letters, you should subscribe. We were the first to publish Sadiq Fofana. We were early adopters of writers like Lisa Taddeo. I mean, anyway, Stephanie Danler, you heard it here first. But I'm reading, so first I'll share these 2. So the first book is, the amazing thing about being a reader is your idea of what the greatest novels are gets constantly rewritten every year you read. And this past summer, I read for the first time The Known World by Edward P. Jones. And it immediately like cut the queue all the way to the front of the line of like one of the greatest novels I've ever encountered. Edward P. Jones has that sort of odd place in American Letters as somebody who is like one of the most highly touted, highly decorated people who just strangely feels underread. And The Known World is just about, primarily the life in this particular, almost like reinvented, imagined place in Virginia. I think it's Manchester, Virginia, and a plantation on Manchester, Virginia that's owned by a slave who is now a slave owner. And it just contains multitudes. And I just feel like it's one of those books that you just can't, you're not an American until you read this book.
That's a statement.
Yeah. Another book that is available now that I am rereading and that I had the pleasure of seeing in early stages. This is a nonfiction book, and I'm rereading because he's about to be a guest of ours in the next couple of weeks at Swanee, is Ben Austen's remarkable work of nonfiction, Correction, parole prisons and the possibility of change. And what he does is he tracks the outcomes of two long incarcerated men in the American carceral system. And it really limbs the ways in which our carceral system, which is more vast and sticky and inescapable than it ever was, does not have built into it a logic of real reform and rehabilitation.
Yeah.
And what that says about us as a country. And it is one of those books which is so eye-opening that you just can't look away. And then finally,
I'm going to have to get him on the show.
You got to get him on the show. It's just because he also wrote about Cabrini Green in his great book, High Risers, about public housing in Chicago. Yeah. And it's just, give that guy a MacArthur. He's doing some really, really major important work. And then a book that is soon to be released, I think it's summer, is Melissa Febos's new The Dry Season, which I had the pleasure of reading in galley form. I've also had the pleasure of publishing Melissa's work quite often at the Sewanee Review. And it's about her year of celibacy. And it was a book that I hope I don't embarrass her. It was a book that I, upon finishing, immediately gave to my 18-year-old daughter in her first year of college. But I gave it to her because, it's about somebody who has essentially lived a life of, to a degree, like a kind of serial monogamy or serial relationships, who realizes that she's gotten so far from herself. And it's about what happens when, again, this is one of those moments of synchronicity, Chris, but like when she decides she's got to change, and it's about what she discovers about herself when she makes what seems at first to be a radical change, but which ultimately settles her in herself and gives her a whole new language for her life as a person who really has the capability of being in real relation to someone else.
These are three fabulous recommendations. I love The Known World and was lucky enough. Edward P. Jones came to my campus and did a reading and a talk, and he was just so marvelous and modest, despite just utter weight of his genius.
Oh yeah, genius,
towering. Yeah, indeed. But I am really excited for listeners of the show to run out and buy Playworld. It is a novel that is just going to take over your life in the best possible way, and you will want Griffin Hurt in your life. You will fall with him and into the sublime and crawl your way back out into the grittier real of New York of the 1980s. And it has just been such a pleasure to talk with you, Adam, and thank you for coming on.
Such a thrill. I love your show so much, Chris.
Thank you so much.
We were at the 40th wedding anniversary celebration of Dr. Barr and his wife, Lynn. The Barrs lived in Great Neck. We'd driven from Manhattan just before the sun was beginning to set. As we crossed the 59th Street Bridge, Roosevelt Island's towers flashed, the shadows of Manhattan's buildings just starting to climb their faces. By the time we arrived, the sky was a buffed pink, with plenty of light for my younger brother, Oren, to name the make and model of every car parked in the driveway, ending with Dr. Barr's Cadillac Seville. It was a vehicle whose cachet we associated with the bold gilt letters on the door of his Gramercy Park office. But the high esteem in which we held him did not change the fact that in our house, and on nights like these, he was known only by his first name, Elliot. He was my father's best friend and our family's psychologist. All of us consulted with him, Mom midweek, Dad and Oren and me on Saturday mornings. My father had been Elliot's patient since before he met my mother, she, the year after they married. Oren had only recently started therapy because his grades were sliding, but I'd been seeing Elliot since I was 6, after a family death I'd caused. It never struck me as odd, the thinness of the membrane between patient and friend, between husband and wife, brother and brother. Perhaps because Elliot had been such a ubiquitous presence for as long as I could remember. If anything, it made Elliot seem even wiser, able, as I imagined he was, to keep so many secrets from 4 people without judging them. The bar's home was so packed with guests it made me feel like we were standing in a closet. The men's blazers and the women's wraps and scarves muffling the music as we moved through zones of perfume, scotch, and cigarette smoke. Oren and I made repeat trips to the buffet, the salmon, soon only a head and a tail, watched some of ABC's Wide World of Sports in the guest room. Elliot had one of the biggest TVs I'd ever seen, but the reception was terrible. And then checked out Elliot's collection of masks mounted in the dining room's display case, whose glass Oren tried to open. Arrow-headed shamans, saber-toothed kabuki demons, and our favorites from the Chinese opera, their designs like superhero masks and as colorful as pinball machines. But having exhausted ways of relieving our boredom, we split up. This was when Naomi and I ended up alone together for the first time. She was sitting on the living room sofa. I sat on the coffee table, facing her. I was telling her about my acting career. She had asked me about playing Roy Scheider's son in The Talent Effect. What was it like working with him? She said. He was nice, I said. Roy and I ate lunch together my first day on the set, and when I opened my soda, it sprayed his face. So he angled his can's mouth toward mine, popped the tab, and got me back. And Joan Collins, she said. Is she as pretty in person? She is, I said. The one day during makeup, the hairdresser stuck a teasing comb behind her ear and lifted a wig clean off her head. Naomi found this hysterical. She snorted when she laughed, pressing her fingernails to her chest. Between her rings and bracelets and her gold earrings shaped like cymbals, she clinked whenever she moved. She was a great-neck Jewess. She had the classic up-island accent, one I could mimic on command. A vaudeville act, this kid is, I said, imitating her. A regular prodigy. She was wide-hipped. She wore sheer stockings beneath a wool skirt. Her blouse was a tailored silk, open at the neck, which revealed, when she leaned forward, a peak of collarbone and the lacy spray of her bra. On her cheek was a light brown birthmark, the texture and color of a burned egg white.
Well, that's all for me for now. My thanks to Adam Ross for coming on to talk about his latest novel, Playworld. You can find links to purchase Playworld and all of Adam's recommended books at the website, burnedbybooks.com. There you'll find all of our previous episodes, links to buy a podcast t-shirt, and ways to get in contact. As you listen, take a moment to rate the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. Until next time, this has been Burned by Books.